Welcome to Module 7 in CS288W Network Administration. We're going to talk about networking printers in a Windows Server 2008 environment. Let's talk about the printer role. It is added through server manager roles. A print server management console is a centralized location for managing and monitoring printers on a server. You can also add and manage printers through a command line on either the full GUI installation or the server core. Multiple components to consider. You've got the physical printer itself, known as the print device. So if you've got an HP printer, Canon printer, whatever it is, that is the print device. You'll see that reference throughout the book and in your actual job as a network administrator. Very important, the printer driver needs to be located on both the server and client computer. So if you have a printer that you want to share on a server, there's got to be a driver for it for that version of Windows. So there's got to be a Windows 2008 driver. Now there's a lot of older printers that the manufacturers decided to not update to Server 2008, so that way you'd have to go out and buy a new printer. So if that's the case, you cannot share that off of a 2008 server. You'll need to get a new printer, or you'll need to have an older version of Windows that's still around in order to share that printer. The print server, you'll see that reference a lot. The server is the Windows 2008 server itself. The print queue is the logical printer that shows up in devices and printers and control panel. So when we go into the print queue, that is another name for the printer that's the logical device there. The printer port is used to communicate with the physical printer. Well, there's the networking port, which we'll be facing on, since this is mostly a Windows networking type of a class. So you'll see the TCP/IP port. Then you've got the LPT and USB ports. There's also serial ports as well. Those are all ports that you can also use to share a printer. Then you have to consider the print job format. Now, EMF is the older format used by Windows 2003, XP, and older. When Windows 2008 came about, along with the desktop versions Vista 7 and 8, it uses a new format called XPS. Server 2008 is compatible with both the older and the newer format types. So it doesn't matter which one you have, as long as there's a driver for it, it will work with both of them. There are multiple ways to connect to a printer when you are serving it off of a 2008 server. You can physically attach it to the server. So you can take a printer, make sure it's close enough to the server, and plug in one of those old-fashioned LPT ports. They're, I believe, 25-pin ports. There's also the 9-pin serial port that comes with the older servers as well, but still a lot of printers still use that 9-pin serial port, especially ones that print carbon copy devices used in point-of-sale systems. You can also share using a USB. So you can plug a USB cable into your printer, and you can share it that way. So the only disadvantage to all of these types of physically attached printers is they have to be close enough to the server, and that just may not be feasible. So network attached is much better because they could be anywhere in the network and you can share it off of the server. It uses the TCP/IP ports or some other third-party provided protocols in some cases, but mostly it uses TCP/IP. Must have either a built-in TCP/IP port in the printer or a third-party print server attached to the printer. So when you go to buy a printer, it's got to have one of those little ports to plug an Ethernet cable into it. If it doesn't have a port, then you have to buy a third-party, such as an HP JetDirect print server that will plug into either the USB or the printer port on the printer. Usually that's some of the older or lower-end printers. And it'll go into one of these printer ports, USB or whatever, onto the printer. But on the other side is a TCP/IP connection through an Ethernet cable. So a couple of different ways to make that work. Also, the newest way is wireless. Now, what I've found personally, I've installed several wireless printers, and they tend to be not very good quality. They tend to work for a little while, then stop working, and then you have to delete all of your settings, re-add them again, then it works for a while, and then it stops working again. So I definitely don't recommend a wireless printer. They're very buggy. They've not figured out how to make this work on a consistent basis as of yet. Multiple ways to deploy. So when you've got your computer all connected up, either physically or through TCP/IP, and you've got your print server role installed, now it's time to connect this thing up. So you can use the Add Printer Wizard, which I'll show you in a minute. You can go through the Shared Printer Resources in Explorer, or you can also choose Group Policy to multiple users all at once. So if you want to push this printer out to lots of people in a group or throughout the entire company, you can do that through Group Policy. For permissions, this is something to keep in mind. When you install a shared printer, everyone has the ability to print to it by default. You can change that. You can make it so only certain groups of people have access to it, but by default, everyone can print to it. Now, you can't really do anything besides print. If you want to manage it, then you have to add additional management. Now, by default, the administrator already has these management roles, as well as the print operator. But you can add individuals or groups of people to have additional permissions as well, such as the Manage Document permission. This allows print jobs to be deleted or restarted. So real handy to give to, say, an admin person in your company, so that way they don't have to call you all the time every time a print job gets stuck. You can also add the Manage Printer, which is the highest permission. So instead of just managing the documents, you can actually manage the entire printer, which allows you to change other permissions as well. And then there's special permissions used just by the administrators to customize permissions as needed. You won't generally get into these very often, but just be aware that they are there, and in some cases you may need to use them. Additional features, you could check the box that says list the printer in Active Directory. That way people can browse to it just by going / server name or clicking on the network icon and browsing to it that way. You can create printer pools, which allows multiple physical printers to be printed from one print queue to load balance print jobs. So this is really handy. So you have to have printers that are either all exactly the same model or will all use the same print driver. Say you've got 3 printers, but you only want to have one print queue to send jobs to all those printers. So what that does is, in a really large office, is you line up the printers all together in the same location, you create the one print queue, and you turn print pooling on. And then you send a print job to it, and whichever printer is free, not busy at that time, it will send the print job to that printer. Very handy to have. Now the opposite of that is printer priorities. It allows one physical printer, so you've just got one printer, but you've got multiple print queues. So you actually see multiple different logical printers in Windows Server. So this allows you to prioritize who gets access, priority access to that printer. For instance, so if you have an executive group and then you have an admin group, you may want the executives to have priority to be able to print to that printer. So if they send a print job at the same time the admin team sends a print job, then the executive job will print first. You also want to might want to render the jobs on the client machines. This is a setting that has come about in recent years that allows you to send the print job rendering to the client PC to take the load off of the server. So when you send a print job, the job has to be rendered to take it, say, from Microsoft Word into something of a language that the printer itself understands, and that's called rendering. So you can do that by default on the server, but if the server starts getting overloaded, then you can allow that to be done on the client side. And then when it's all done being rendered, it goes to the print server and then to the printer. And that saves a big load on the printer if the client workstations have some extra CPU cycles that aren't being used. You can also push out drivers to other versions of Windows. So through the print management piece, you can allow the administrator to push out multiple versions of drivers based on the client version of Windows, such as Windows 7 or Windows XP, and whether or not it's 32-bit or 64-bit. Those use different drivers most of the time. Some of the newer drivers use a universal print driver, but they don't all do that. Line Printer Daemon Services. It's a role that can be added to print Linux and Unix attached printers. So if you have a printer that is physically attached to a Linux or Unix server, you can also share that through your Windows 2008 server by adding the Line Printer Daemon Services role service. Internet printing can also allow domain and non-domain users to print to shared printers through a web page. So you can actually connect to a printer. Instead of using network browsing, you can just type in an IP address or a name into a web browser. You'll find the printer, connect to it, and then you can print. So to summarize, we talked about the printer role, components needed, job format, ways to connect, ways to deploy, permissions, additional features, LPD, and internet printing. So let's look at some of those types of things. And you've got the role, of course, for print and document services, which we've already installed here, and you can do as well. And then when you're ready, you go ahead and open up Print Management. So from Print Management, you can do a lot of things, but in order to compare Print Management, I want to show you first what regular device and printers look like when you open up the device and printers option through the control panel. So this is a printer we've already created. You can right click on it, and in the old days you would go to properties, but now in our version R2 you don't see the properties that you're expecting to see. You have to right click now and choose printer properties. Now you see what you're expecting to see, the ports, the sharing, that kind of thing. So from here we can share the printer. We can render the print jobs in the client computers, like I spoke about earlier. We can also list it in the directory, so you can browse to it through network. You can also go to additional drivers, and from here, you can add additional drivers if you have the driver disk, and you can download the drivers from HP or Canon or wherever, and you can put in, say, 32-bit drivers or other versions as well. Here's where we put in the share name, so when you browse to it, you know the name of it. Click on ports. Here's where we set up the TCP/IP port. So if we want, we can add a new port. It can be a local printer or it can be a TCP/IP printer port. Add port, choose next, type in the IP address. It will now try to query the printer. Of course, it won't find it because this is just a fake printer. And that's something that you should be aware. In order to do this lab, you don't have to have real printers attached. You can use you can create a fake printer and you can still get the labs done without needing the actual physical printer. All right, so once the TCP/IP port is installed, we can make sure we check that box. We can configure it. By default, it communicates on port 9100. And if you want, you can change to LPR for another queue name for, say, Linux or Unix, and you can type in whatever port it wants to use. If we click on Advanced, we can change the driver if we want through the drop-down or through the new driver wizard. We can also start printing immediately or start after the last page is spooled. Sometimes changing some of these different settings makes things run better or worse, so it's good to practice a little bit. Here's where you set the priority like we talked about earlier, and the priority is 1 by default, and you can make another printer queue be priority 2 if you choose to prioritize for various different groups. And then under security, here's where you would change and say the administrators would get the priority 1, or the executives get priority 1, and then another team gets priority 2. And you could remove the everyone group from that list and then just add in the groups that you want for each printer queue. If we go back to printer ports and we check the box that says enable printer pooling, that allows us to check multiple different ports. So remember, printer pools are where we have multiple printers, but we have one printer queue. So this is our printer queue, and then we have multiple printers that we're going to load balance these jobs to. So you don't want to use printer ports and priorities typically in the same office. Usually you use one or the other. Now if we uncheck printer pooling and then we try to check multiple ports, it doesn't work. It only works when you check the pooling box. Then it allows you to check multiple ones. All right, so that gives you a good idea of how to configure sharing directly from the devices and printers. The printer wizard If you click on add a printer, you can choose the add a local printer, or you can choose add a network printer. Either way you choose, you can still get the same job done. So we'll just go ahead and choose network printer, and we're going to tell it to stop searching for one because we don't actually have one. Click on the printer isn't here. We will select the printer by name if we want, or we can find a printer in the list, and we'll just call this one test, and we'll choose next, and it says you need to specify a valid network printer name. Okay, well, I can't use that, and I'm going to have to change how it is that I want to do. So let's say I want to go with the TCP IP address instead. So I can auto detect it, host name or IP address 192.168.0.50. I can choose to query the printer so it'll automatically add the right driver, but I don't want that to happen. So even if I don't choose to query the printer for the driver type, it's still going to try to contact the printer, and you just can't, unfortunately, uncheck this. So you have to wait the 20 or 30 seconds in order for it to finish. All right, I saved you all that time by pausing the video. So now we can choose the type of connection, and by default, I just go ahead and choose the generic network card. Pretty much all of them will work with that. Now we want to choose the type of printer, and next, and then we'll give it the printer name. We'll just choose the default, and now it's going to install the printer. And it's going to ask, do we want to share it? Sure, let's go ahead and share it. And then we want to set it as default printer. No, we can also choose to print a test page if we want. So now we have our new printer show up. Let's go ahead and look at the print management and see how much more we can do than what we could do just through the devices. So if we open up the print management and we click on the name of the server, we've got lots of options here, such as we see a list of all the drivers. So that's real handy. We can go ahead and add more drivers right from this list, and then choose whether it's x64, x86, or Itanium, which nobody uses anymore. We can also click here for the forms, the various different forms that a printer can use, and we can right click here. We can ports. We can add ports, we can manage ports, we can do lots of different things that you couldn't do when you were just clicking on there. So there's the ports as well. And then here's, you can see COM ports, you can see TCP/IP ports, LPT ports. These ones that start with a T, these are all USB type ports that you see in a terminal server. When somebody logs into a terminal server, you'll see that TS ports. And then you've got the printers themselves. The printers themselves are going to be the ones that we've got installed here. Will show up here as well, and we can right click and we can add a printer. And we can choose the type of printer we want, and it does it a little bit more efficiently. So it allows us to choose forms, ports, drivers, printers, all these different types of things that you couldn't see all at once in the other folder. So that is the print management console. So let's go ahead and take a look at our lab for the week. So this is lab 7. Remember, you do not need to have an actual printer to do these labs, and it's going to cover Chapter 8, and you want to do these various different activities, and here's the different page numbers you'll find those activities.